Under the blazing frontier sun, a cowboy sacrificed his only horse to save a tribal woman from certain hardship. He left, expecting nothing but solitude. At dawn, the horizon darkened as her father rode in, flanked by his warriors. Then, with a gesture that eclipsed gold and treasure, he presented a gift so monumental it would bind the cowboy's fate to the tribe forever, and leave everyone witnessing it utterly amazed. The first light of dawn stretched over the desert like a fragile promise, pale and trembling. Dust whipped along the cracked earth, rising in spirals that caught the orange-pink glow and turned it into a haze of trembling fire. A lone barn, leaning and worn, struggled against the wind's fierce caress, its boards creaking like bones in the desert's cold fingers. Thunder muttered far away, an ominous drumbeat that rolled across the horizon, promising rain, perhaps ruin. Inside the barn, a figure moved with urgent precision. A cowboy, lean and sun-scorched, his face lined by years of storms and solitude, gripped a broken beam, his hands raw, the veins taut beneath dust-smeared skin. Every strike of his hammer sounded against the fading clatter of the wind, a fragile rebellion against the elements. He had little else in this world, and even less margin for failure. Then, through the storm's blur, he saw her, a figure trapped in the mud and wind, struggling to rise, robes whipped violently, hair plastered to her face. She was a stranger, yet her desperation struck a chord in the cowboy's chest, a silent alarm that left no room for hesitation. His heart thumped against his ribs like a caged animal, but his decision was clear. There was no thought of gain, no calculation of risk, only the instinct that some things demanded courage before consequence. His hand rested on the neck of his only horse, a chestnut with eyes as deep and patient as the desert night. He whispered to it, a promise, a plea, and with a deft motion, swung the saddle over the animal's back. The creature snorted, sensing the urgency, and together they became a single arrow through the morning storm. Mud and wind lashed at them, but he pressed forward, boots sinking into the wet earth, hands gripping reins, eyes fixed on the flailing form of the woman. Each step of the horse was measured, deliberate, carrying not just a stranger, but the fragile weight of honor, the invisible ledger of a man's soul. He reached her just as the sky broke with a flash of lightning, momentarily painting the desert in silver fire. She looked up, eyes wide with shock and fear, yet something deeper flickered, an unspoken recognition of the humanity that had reached for her in a world that had offered none. He leaned close, voice calm against the storm's roar, and guided her toward the saddle. Every motion was a vow, every breath a testament. Some debts are not measured in gold, but in the courage to act when the world turns cruel. As they rode back toward the barn, the storm seemed to yield to their will, clouds parting reluctantly, revealing the first real light of day. Dust swirled behind them, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant rain. And in that moment the cowboy understood. The choice to give what he could not spare would define the hours, days, perhaps even the life ahead, for both of them. By the time they reached the barn, the storm had softened into a low, persistent drizzle, each drop a soft drum against the tin roof. The woman dismounted with trembling legs, mud streaked across her skin, robes clinging to her frame like wet paper. Her eyes, wide and wary, studied the cowboy, searching for some hint of intention beyond the quiet courage in his stance. He offered a nod, a simple gesture, but weighty with meaning. Words were unnecessary here. The desert had its own language, and those who listened understood the truth that actions speak where tongues falter. He led the horse inside, brushing its flanks, whispering reassurances that seemed meant as much for himself as for the animal. The woman lingered at the barn's threshold, shadows from the half-collapsed roof falling across her face, lending her an almost spectral presence. The air smelled of wet earth and aged timber, a mixture of decay and resilience, mirroring the man before her, worn, tested, yet unbroken. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind had quieted to a hum, the rain a gentle patter, as if the desert itself paused to witness this fragile moment of human connection. Then, quietly, she stepped forward, hands extended in gratitude, though the gesture carried a hint of hesitation, a recognition that survival often comes at the cost of trust. He allowed her to steady herself, guiding her gently to a dry corner of the barn. A single lantern flickered on, its light catching the dust in golden beams that danced across the rough boards, illuminating the smallest details, the calluses on his hands, the mud-caked hem of her robes, the quiet determination in their eyes. In that flickering light, a silent understanding passed between them. Danger had not yet left, and yet courage had found its place here. The horse, his only companion and lifeline, stood patiently nearby, a steadfast sentinel. Its warmth, its steady breathing, a reminder that even in solitude, bonds could be forged in the heat of necessity. As the storm moved off into the horizon, revealing slivers of blue sky above jagged desert ridges, the cowboy felt the weight of what he had done, and what was yet to come. He had given away his only horse, the one link to his livelihood, to save a stranger. And in that act, he had set in motion a chain of events that would test honor, courage, and the limits of the human heart. Outside, the desert exhaled. The wind whispered through broken boards and rusted nails, carrying a promise of trials yet to arrive. And inside, in the fragile sanctuary of that battered barn, two strangers shared a quiet breath, bound by an unspoken vow, to survive, to endure, and to honor the fragile, fleeting gift of trust. The dawn had broken, but the desert's reckoning was only beginning. The morning unfolded like a slow wound, light spilling over the jagged horizon, turning the desert into a canvas of muted gold and ash. The barn, battered but standing, smelled of wet timber and the faint tang of fear. Inside, the cowboy moved quietly, hands tracing the familiar lines of his space. The rough-hewn shelves, the worn ropes, the old tools that bore the imprint of countless seasons. Each object was a memory, a fragment of a life stitched together from solitude and struggle. He paused by the empty stall where his horse had stood, the absence of the chestnut echoing through him like a hollow drum. Memories rose unbidden. A young colt shivering in the winter snow, a hand reaching out to steady it. The same horse racing through sun-scorched plains, mane whipping like fire, carrying him toward freedom he never fully grasped. Each recollection carried a sting, a reminder of what he had lost, and what he had given away in an instant of moral clarity. The tribal woman stirred nearby, her presence a quiet shadow against the flickering lantern light. She did not speak, but her eyes, dark and probing, seemed to reach into corners of his soul he rarely revealed, probing the hollows of grief and memory he carried alone. The cowboy's gaze drifted outward, past the barn doors, to the undulating dust that still lingered over the plains. The wind whispered through the half-broken fence, a mournful melody that resonated with his own sense of isolation. He thought of family, long gone to famine and misfortune, of voices silenced by hunger, of hands that had once held his own and now existed only in memory. The desert had taken much, yet it had shaped him, hardening resolve while leaving scars that never fully healed. Solitude had been his companion, a silent witness to nights spent under cold stars, heart thrumming with both longing and resignation. Even as the storm's remnants dissipated, its echo lingered. The mud-caked earth outside mirrored the residue of loss in his mind. Messy, unavoidable, and persistent. He reflected on the horse, his one true companion, the creature that had carried him through years of hardship. Offering it to the woman had been an act of defiance against self-interest, a surrender to conscience that left him raw, vulnerable, yet unburdened by regret. The silence of the barn pressed in on him, but it was a comforting silence, one that allowed the mind to wander through corridors of memory, through shadows of past mistakes and triumphs alike. The woman watched quietly, patient and still, as though understanding that grief and reflection were rituals that must not be interrupted. In that quiet, a bridge formed, a tenuous thread of recognition, of shared humanity, stretched between two strangers at the edge of a vast, unforgiving land. Outside, the desert shifted under the soft morning light. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden haze, the wind carrying whispers of distant canyons and hidden ravines. Somewhere, A lone hawk cried, a sound sharp and solitary, cutting through the lingering quiet. The cowboy let his gaze linger on the horizon, heart heavy yet steady, as if drawing strength from the land that had taken so much and, paradoxically, offered the clarity to act rightly in the moment that mattered most. Every creaking board, every shadowed corner of the barn, seemed to hold a memory, a lesson learned through hardship. And as he settled into the slow rhythm of dawn, he understood something fundamental. Loss did not merely take. It also carved the space for courage, for moral reckoning, for choices that could ripple far beyond the span of a single life. The day pressed on, slow and deliberate, sunlight warming the dust-streaked boards of the barn, yet failing to penetrate the shadows within. The cowboy moved among the remnants of his life, each step stirring memories as palpable as the lingering scent of rain-soaked earth. His hands lingered over worn tools, the grooves etched by decades of labor, and he felt the weight of absence. Family, home, companionship, all reduced to fragile echoes in the quiet of the desert morning. He thought of the famine that had torn his family apart, of voices that once filled this world now gone, of a mother's gentle scolding and a father's firm hand, all lost to a merciless wind of time and misfortune. The barn was more than shelter. It was a shrine to survival, a testament to what one man could endure alone. Yet today, the emptiness seemed heavier, sharper, made all the more acute by the presence of another soul. The tribal woman moved carefully, settling herself on a wooden crate, her eyes tracing the rough lines of his sanctuary without intrusion. There was curiosity there, but also patience, a quiet understanding that grief and reflection were not to be disturbed. And in the silence, the cowboy realized something. His solitude, his grief, his losses, they were not barriers, but bridges, connecting him to the lives of those who dared to enter his world with trust and vulnerability. He remembered his horse again, the chestnut with a spirit as untamed as the desert wind. Offering it away had been an act that could have left him destitute, a surrender of the last thread tying him to freedom and livelihood. Yet the memory of that choice brought a strange solace. In giving, he had discovered strength. In sacrifice, he had unearthed courage that solitude alone could never teach. The wind outside had softened to a whisper, carrying the scent of sage and distant canyon fires. Light filtered through broken slats, catching dust in glimmering shafts, illuminating particles suspended like tiny stars frozen in a desert galaxy. Shadows danced across the barn's floor, stretching and contracting with the slow arc of the sun, and in them, he saw fragments of the past. Friends lost, battles fought in silence, nights spent staring at an empty horizon. A sudden movement drew his attention. The woman rose, moving toward the barn doors with tentative steps, peering out at the plains beyond. There was a longing in her posture, a subtle hesitation as if measuring whether the world outside was friend or foe. The cowboy watched, recognizing in her stance the same tension he had felt countless times. The uncertain dance between trust and survival, courage and caution. He spoke, voice low, roughened by years of wind and dust, carrying not only words but a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. "The desert gives nothing lightly," he said, "and it takes everything too. You learn quick what matters, and what does not." She turned to him, eyes catching the morning light, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, an understanding that honor, compassion, and courage were rarer than gold, and that sometimes survival demanded acts larger than fear. No words could define the gravity of their shared moment, for it was lived in the small, almost invisible choices. A hand extended, a horse given, trust offered where none could be owed. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, promising trials yet unseen, horizons unbroken by roads or fences. And inside, the cowboy felt the weight of history pressing upon him. The sum of losses, the measure of endurance, the shaping of character in the crucible of solitude. He knew the storm outside had passed, but storms lingered in other forms, of loyalty, of debt, of the hidden currents of fate that had already begun to move toward them, quiet and inevitable as the desert wind. As the afternoon light softened into the warm amber of late day, a single thought settled over him, clear and unshakable. To act rightly, even when the world offers nothing in return, is the only measure of a man. And in that, he found both resolve and anticipation, for the desert's horizon had more to demand, and more to reveal. The desert at sunset wore a golden shroud, long shadows stretching like fingers across the cracked earth. Dust hung heavy in the air, drifting lazily with the wind, catching the last rays of sun and turning them to molten fire. The barn, still battered but resolute, stood as a lone sentinel against the sprawling plains. Its walls whispering tales of storms survived and nights endured. The cowboy moved through his small domain with careful steps, each movement deliberate, measured. His hands, calloused and steady, brushed over tools and timber alike, as if seeking comfort in the familiar. Yet something had changed in the air, a subtle tension that rode the wind, a shift in the quiet that prickled his senses. The desert has ears, he thought, and tonight it was listening. A movement at the edge of the barn's shadow drew his attention. First, a ripple of fabric, then a silhouette framed by the fading light. She emerged from the golden haze, a woman, her steps tentative, yet purposeful, eyes scanning the barn with an intensity that carried both desperation and resolve. The wind tugged at her garments, flinging her dark hair across her face, yet she pressed forward, unwavering. He paused, breath held, reading her in the silence. She was not a ghost of the storm, nor a wanderer lost to the plains. There was purpose in her presence, a quiet urgency that resonated beneath the surface. The horse he had given, the chestnut that had carried both honor and risk, had long since vanished beyond the horizon. Yet in her eyes, he saw a question. What place is this, in a world so vast, for a stranger who dares to arrive at sunset? The woman stopped at the threshold, one hand resting lightly on the warped wood, the other clenching her skirts against the wind. Her gaze, sharp and calculating, flicked toward him, but never directly. There was a story there, written in the tension of her shoulders, the slight furrow of her brow, a narrative of necessity and peril, of a journey forced by forces unseen. The cowboy did not move immediately. Instead, he allowed the moment to stretch, the silence thickening around them like smoke. He could hear the distant call of a coyote, the sigh of the wind through half-broken boards, the low hum of a desert that seemed to hold its breath. And then, just as subtly, the threads of fate began to weave together. Two lives, disparate and solitary, converging in this fragile barn at the edge of the plains. Lightning from a distant storm flashed across the horizon, illuminating the contours of her face for a heartbeat. High cheekbones, dark eyes, lips pressed in quiet determination. In that instant, the cowboy felt a mixture of curiosity and caution, a pulse of recognition that this visitor was no ordinary traveler. She carried with her an aura of the unknown, a promise of trials to come, a weight of consequence that pressed down even in the dying light. He stepped forward, boots scuffing the dusty floor, hands relaxed but ready. The air between them was thick with anticipation, a charge that neither wind nor sun could dissipate. The woman's eyes met his, steady and unyielding, and in that gaze was the spark of challenge, of story, of danger wrapped in mystery. The barn seemed to shrink around them, the desert falling away into the hush of twilight, leaving only two figures and the unspoken tension of what might follow. And in that quiet, golden hour, the cowboy understood a truth he had known in storms past. Survival is not measured solely in endurance, but in the courage to confront the unknown. And sometimes, the unknown arrives quietly, on weary feet and determined eyes, to test the fiber of a man's soul. The twilight deepened, folding the desert into shades of violet and ochre. Shadows lengthened, brushing the edges of the barn like fingers of doubt. Yet inside, the air vibrated with a quiet intensity. The woman stepped fully into the doorway, her boots leaving faint impressions in the dust, her breath steady despite the long journey that had brought her here. The cowboy watched, unblinking, noting the subtle strength in her posture, the way her shoulders squared despite fatigue, the way her eyes scanned, assessing, weighing, searching. She carried no weapons visibly, yet every line of her form hinted at readiness, a life lived on alert. The storm that had passed earlier seemed to linger around her, a tempest contained in human form. He gestured toward the interior of the barn, his voice low, carrying the weight of caution and invitation alike. "It's dry in here," he said. "You can stay a while." No more words were needed. The desert spoke in silence as much as in sound. She moved past him, taking care to avoid brushing against the horse troughs, the scattered straw, the remnants of a life held together by necessity and solitude. Once inside, she paused near a shaft of fading sunlight, allowing the warmth to touch her face, to dry the remnants of rain and dust from her hair. She looked back once, toward the door, as if expecting shadows to trail her, and then forward, toward the cowboy, and for the first time, a faint smile brushed her lips. A smile that carried gratitude, wary respect, and a flicker of relief. The cowboy settled against the barn wall, arms crossed, eyes following her movements. He sensed questions unasked, stories untold, dangers unspoken. The desert had taught him to read the language of tension, to sense the currents beneath calm surfaces. And beneath this woman's composed exterior, he felt the pulse of urgency, the unmistakable rhythm of someone who had come far and fast, fleeing some threat yet unshown. Time seemed to stretch, measured not in minutes but in the quiet exchange of presence, in the subtle acknowledgments of two souls weighing one another against the backdrop of survival. Outside, the wind carried whispers through broken slats, and the first stars appeared, pinpricks of silver against the indigo sky. The barn, a sanctuary against the encroaching night, became a stage for understanding to form, for trust to tremble into being, for the invisible threads of connection to tighten with the hush of shared space. Finally, she spoke, voice soft yet unwavering, a cadence shaped by desert winds and endless trails. "I mean no harm," she said, the words simple but deliberate. "I only seek shelter, for the storm was not the only danger I have crossed." The cowboy's gaze held her steady, reading the subtle tremor in her tone, the way her hands flexed at her sides, the tightness around her eyes. Danger, yes, but also honesty. The desert had hardened her, shaped her into someone who measured every word, every gesture. And in that, he found both caution and kinship, for he too had learned the economy of trust. He inclined his head once, a slow, deliberate motion. "Then you have it," he said. "But the night is long, and the desert keeps its secrets close. You do well to remember that." She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the wisdom in his caution, of the mutual understanding that survival required more than mere presence. It demanded vigilance, adaptability, and courage measured in quiet increments. The barn settled into a fragile calm, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the rustle of straw under her careful movements. And as darkness wrapped the desert around them, the cowboy felt the stirrings of something he had not known in years: anticipation. For this encounter, quiet and deliberate, would ripple through the coming days, carrying with it suspense, challenge, and revelation. The unexpected visitor had arrived, and with her, the slow turning of fate's will began, unseen yet inexorable, promising that the desert would test them both in ways they had yet to imagine. Twilight draped the desert in violet and bronze, the last embers of sunlight sliding down jagged ridges and settling like molten gold across the plains. The barn, weathered and steadfast, glowed faintly from within, firelight flickering against rough walls, casting elongated shadows that danced like silent witnesses. Inside, the cowboy moved with measured care, the weight of his choices pressing against him like the evening air, heavy and electric. He knew what the night might bring. The tribal woman, now a quiet presence in his barn, had stirred something long dormant, both curiosity and unease, a moral reckoning he could not escape. The chestnut horse, gone but not forgotten, lingered in his thoughts, a symbol of sacrifice, of honor, of courage tested in the moment it mattered most. Her eyes met his from across the barn, dark pools reflecting the flickering lantern light. There was gratitude there, yes, but also a subtle tension, as if she too felt the weight of unspoken consequences. The silence stretched, punctuated by distant calls of desert animals, the rasp of a raven, the low cry of a coyote, the whispering of wind through broken boards. All of it pressed upon him, a reminder that the world beyond the barn's walls waited, patient and inevitable. He moved closer to the fire, letting its warmth brush against his weathered face. Shadows stretched and shrank across his features, revealing lines etched by storms, both of wind and of life. There was a choice before him, one measured not in coin or land, but in integrity and risk. To shelter her fully, to offer sustenance and protection in a world where kindness was dangerous, or to preserve the fragile remnants of his own life, guarding against possible wrath from unseen tribal forces. The wind rattled the barn roof, a low, urgent reminder that choices made here would ripple beyond the quiet of these walls. He studied her profile as she moved to a corner, brushing straw into a makeshift seat, her movements careful, deliberate. Every gesture spoke of someone accustomed to danger, someone who understood the fragile calculus of survival. Yet she had come seeking shelter, relying on a man she barely knew, in a place where solitude was the norm and trust could be fatal. His conscience stirred with an almost painful clarity. Honor demanded action, demanded risk. The desert had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to step forward despite it. And so he stood at the crossroads of choice, feeling the pull of moral gravity. Protect the stranger, extend trust where none could be owed, or retreat into the safety of isolation, letting fear dictate the measure of his soul. The lantern flickered, casting brief shadows that leapt across the walls, and in those flickering silhouettes, he saw reflections of his past decisions. Moments where courage had brought reward, where hesitation had cost more than action ever could. He inhaled the dry, fragrant air of the desert, tasted the smoke of the fire, and felt the pulse of something larger than himself. A truth older than wind-swept canyons. Integrity is its own reward, and honor must be defended in the smallest acts as fiercely as in the largest battles. Slowly, deliberately, he made his choice. Not with words, not with flourish, but in the quiet alignment of heart and mind. He would honor her, protect her, risk the consequences, because to do otherwise would be to betray the code he had carved into his bones through years of hardship and solitude. The desert had tested him before. Now it would see the measure of his character in the actions taken in this quiet barn, beneath the dying light of day and the watchful eyes of shadows. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sage and distant earth, a promise and a warning intertwined. Inside, the barn settled into a fragile calm, firelight dancing across faces and dust motes alike. In that stillness, both cowboy and stranger understood that the night ahead would be long, and choices once made could not easily be undone. And yet, beneath the tension, beneath the awareness of looming peril, there was clarity. Honor, once chosen, is a lantern in the darkness, and some debts demand courage beyond fear, beyond self-interest, beyond the fleeting safety of solitude. Night fell fully, draping the desert in a deep indigo, punctuated by stars that burned cold and distant. The barn, a fragile bastion against the vast emptiness, seemed alive with the quiet hum of tension, of decisions made and consequences yet to unfold. The cowboy moved near the fire, its glow reflecting in his eyes like molten amber, steady and unyielding. Every muscle, every line of his face, carried the weight of choice, the weight of honor accepted in silence, in action rather than words. The tribal woman sat in the corner, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes observing, measuring. She had crossed storms, traversed plains, and faced dangers unknown to reach this point. And yet, in this barn, she waited for the subtle proof of his integrity. He knew that trust, once offered, was as fragile as the thin timbers surrounding them, and just as easily shattered. The wind whispered through broken slats, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, a reminder that the desert never truly sleeps, that it watches and waits, and it remembers. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate, the firelight tracing his shadow along the dusty floor. His hands rested lightly on the rough timber as he approached, not in threat but in presence, a tangible assurance that his choice was unwavering. "You've come far," he said, voice low, tempered by the weight of the desert night. The path behind you was not easy, nor will the path ahead be simple. Here you will find what little protection I can offer. Beyond this you walk your own trial. She lifted her gaze, dark eyes meeting his, steady and discerning. A faint flicker of understanding passed between them, a recognition that courage and honor had converged in a single moment, and that the measure of a man and of a stranger was revealed not in words, but in choices made under duress. The night stretched on, punctuated by distant howls, the rustle of wind through desert brush, the quiet crackle of fire. They shared no words beyond necessity, yet each movement, each glance, carried conversation deeper than language could convey. The barn became a crucible, forging a fragile bond out of shared awareness of danger, of duty, and of the moral imperatives that had guided the cowboy to extend trust when none was owed. He stepped back toward the center of the barn, lifting his gaze to the horizon visible through broken boards. The faint glow of a rising moon touched the jagged ridges, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Somewhere beyond, unseen and inevitable, forces stirred. Tribal eyes, distant riders, the currents of fate converging toward this lonely barn. He felt it in the tightening of his chest, in the pulse of readiness that ran along his spine. Yet he remained calm, steady in the knowledge that his choice had been made, and that honor demanded follow-through, even if danger pressed close. The woman shifted slightly, her movements careful, deliberate. She did not speak, but her presence was a testament to understanding. Here, in this fragile space, they were both vulnerable, yet bound by the quiet covenant of integrity. Courage given freely, protection offered without expectation, and the recognition that moral courage could outshine the harshest desert night. The fire sputtered once, casting a final flicker of golden light across the barn's worn boards. The cowboy inhaled the dry, fragrant air, tasting the tension, the anticipation, the weight of what was to come. He knew that tomorrow would test the choices made tonight, that loyalty, courage, and danger would converge in ways he could not yet see. But he also knew that the measure of a man was not taken in comfort or safety. It was revealed in the courage to act rightly, even when the world offers nothing in return. Outside, the desert exhaled. Shadows stretched and merged, dust lifted in soft eddies, and the night deepened into a tapestry of infinite stars. Inside, the barn held two lives, bound temporarily by circumstance, yet irrevocably tied through the choice to honor, to protect, and to confront fear with courage. And in that still, sacred space, the cowboy understood something elemental. Sometimes, the only true measure of power lies in the willingness to place another above oneself, to risk everything for the sake of honor, and to embrace the unknown with steadfast heart. Morning arrived quietly, the first rays of sun piercing the barn's gaps and illuminating motes of dust suspended in golden light. The air was still, heavy with the scent of straw, earth, and the faint tang of lingering rain. Outside, the desert stretched in endless undulations, silent except for the occasional whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling above. Within the barn, however, an unspoken tension hovered, a quiet anticipation of truths yet to be revealed. The cowboy moved methodically, tending to the remnants of the previous storm, stacking boards, straightening loose beams, yet his mind wandered to the woman seated in the corner. Her dark eyes followed his movements, alert and cautious, a silent observer of the small rituals that defined his solitary life. But now, beneath her composed exterior, he sensed a depth, a shadow of purpose beyond mere survival, a secret waiting for the right moment to unfold. She spoke finally, voice low and measured, as though the words themselves carried weighty consequences. "You gave much for me," she said, "and yet, you know little of what has brought me here." The cowboy paused, hands resting on the rough wood of a half-broken table. Her words, simple yet deliberate, carried a gravity that pressed against his chest. He nodded slowly, inviting her to continue, aware that the calm of the barn was fragile, like the surface of a desert pond that could shatter with the faintest disturbance. "My family," she said, her eyes darkening with memory. "They are not ordinary. The desert sees all, remembers all, and we are bound to its currents in ways few can comprehend. I did not come by chance. He studied her silently, noting the precise way she spoke, the careful placement of her hands, the tension in her jaw. Every gesture, every subtle inflection, revealed more than the words themselves. Danger hovered in the spaces between sentences, a slow, building presence that made the barn feel smaller, more intimate, yet infinitely perilous. The sun rose higher, shafts of light piercing through gaps in the barn, illuminating the dust motes that swirled like golden spirits around them. Each particle seemed to carry memory, fragments of the past hidden in silence. And in that light, the cowboy realized the magnitude of what he faced. This woman was no ordinary visitor. Her journey, her very presence, was tied to forces far larger than he had anticipated. Forces that could reach across the desert and change the course of lives with quiet inevitability. She rose, moving closer, her steps deliberate, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. Her gaze met his, unwavering. "There are debts unpaid," she whispered, "and secrets buried beneath the dust of this land. I did not come seeking shelter alone. I came because it is necessary. You have already shown courage and honor, but the desert does not reward lightly. It demands understanding and vigilance." The cowboy's chest tightened. He had understood danger before, had measured risk in storms and solitude, but this was different. The threat was intangible, wrapped in human form, woven into the quiet determination of someone whose life had been shaped by hidden currents and unseen debts. The barn, once a sanctuary, now seemed a stage upon which unseen hands were already moving the pieces. He moved closer, lowering his voice to match the gravity in hers. "Then tell me," he said, "what I must know. The desert has a way of testing all who enter it. Secrets or not, I will face them, if only to see what it asks of me." Her lips curved slightly, a shadow of acknowledgement, but her eyes remained somber, reflecting the weight of generations, of promises and debts that stretched beyond the confines of the barn. She spoke then of her family, of power and influence woven into the desert's hidden veins, of alliances and rivalries as old as the sand and stone, of dangers that could descend without warning. Each revelation tightened the air, a coil of suspense that wrapped around them both, binding them in shared understanding and silent anticipation. The cowboy listened, the firelight flickering across his face, illuminating the lines carved by years of storms and solitude. Each new secret carried risk, each revelation a test of courage, of wisdom, of the ability to act rightly when the stakes were unseen yet immense. And as the morning light shifted, painting the barn in warm amber tones, he knew that the path ahead would demand vigilance unlike any before, for survival was no longer measured solely by skill or strength, but by perception, judgment, and the steadfastness of honor in the face of unfolding mysteries. Outside, the desert remained indifferent, its ridges bathed in sunlight, its canyons silent. But within the barn, a quiet tension had settled, an awareness that what lay beneath the dust was more than history. It was a force that could shape the next moments, the next choices, the next reckoning of courage and integrity. The barn seemed to hold its breath, each shadow and shaft of light trembling with anticipation. The woman moved with deliberate grace, circling the center of the space as if mapping unseen lines, tracing histories carved into the wood and dust. Her presence was magnetic, a quiet force that demanded attention without command, filling the barn with unspoken purpose. "My father," she said, voice low. "He will know if I am protected or endangered. You do not yet understand the weight of what you offered, or the consequences it carries." The cowboy remained silent, his gaze steady, taking in every nuance of her tone, the tremor in her hands, the determination in her eyes. He felt the swell of responsibility rise within him, a debt unpaid not with coin, but with vigilance, courage, and unwavering honor. The chestnut horse, the choice he had made at dawn, had been a symbol of sacrifice. Now the stakes were larger, woven into the invisible web of tribal codes, family loyalties, and desert law. She leaned against the rough timber, letting the morning light catch her features. Lines of worry and resolve marked her face, yet there was beauty in the strength she carried, the kind of strength shaped by storms and survival, by paths walked alone and dangers faced without hesitation. In that moment, the cowboy understood that bravery was not always loud or violent. Sometimes it was measured in patience, in listening, in holding ground where fear threatened to overwhelm. The desert, she continued, remembers everything, keeps score of actions, of courage, of the debts we owe. You have acted rightly, yet you do not yet know the full measure of the debt you carry. My Father's eyes are far-reaching, and the ripples of your kindness have already touched them. The words sank deep, a mixture of warning and revelation. The cowboy's chest tightened, the reality of consequence pressing upon him. He had given freely, acted with honor, yet now he recognized that every act of courage was also a summons, a call to further challenge, to trials that would test the heart as surely as the body. He shifted, feeling the weight of inevitability settle over him like the dust suspended in golden shafts of sunlight. She stepped closer, the faint creak of floorboards echoing in the still barn. I did not come by accident, she said, her voice gaining strength, tempered with gravity. There are forces that move unseen, currents older than the hills, and they will descend to see who stands true. You have already chosen a path, and now it will be tested. The cowboy nodded, the firelight in his eyes steady, unwavering. He understood that this was more than a test of skill or courage. It was a test of moral fiber, of integrity, of the ability to hold steadfast in the face of uncertainty. The barn, once a place of quiet reflection and solitary labor, had become a crucible for truth, where decisions made in moments of clarity could echo far beyond the boundaries of walls and wood. She paused, letting silence fall between them, the weight of her words lingering like smoke. Then, quietly, she said, "The desert does not forgive easily, but it honors those who act with heart. You will see, soon enough, that what you do next will shape more than your fate." The cowboy felt the pulse of responsibility thrum through him. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the air, illuminating every speck of dust, every shadowed corner, every hidden crevice of the barn. Yet even in light, danger and mystery remained, woven into the fabric of this fragile place. He inhaled slowly, tasting the mixture of anticipation and resolve, knowing that preparation alone would not suffice. Courage, vigilance, and honor must guide each action, each thought, each decision. Outside, the desert stretched in quiet indifference, the ridges gleaming in gold, the canyons holding secrets older than men. Inside, the barn hummed with invisible tension, dust particles shimmering like distant stars in a galaxy of quiet suspense. And as the cowboy and the woman stood together, bound by circumstance and honor, both understood that the next steps, unseen, unpredictable, inevitable, would demand everything they had and more. The desert waited, patient and unyielding, while within the barn, secrets whispered beneath the dust, and the first tremors of coming trials began to stir. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, blotting out the sun and casting the desert in sudden, brooding shadows. The air turned thick and electric, charged with the smell of distant rain and the scent of dust disturbed by unseen movement. The barn, once a sanctuary, now felt small, exposed, a fragile shield against a storm that was not only in the sky but approaching on the ground. The cowboy stood at the threshold, boots planted firmly on the dry, cracked earth, eyes scanning the ridges and canyons beyond. The wind whipped against his coat, tugging at his hat, carrying with it the faint rumble of hooves, distant but unmistakable. They were coming, warriors swift and numerous, riding with purpose and fury. Each heartbeat resonated with the knowledge that the choice he made at dawn, the gift of his horse and shelter, had drawn him into a current he could neither ignore nor outrun. Inside the barn, the woman moved with quiet urgency, stacking a few supplies, checking doors and latches, each motion precise, rehearsed, and filled with silent intent. She was no longer just a visitor seeking refuge. She was a herald of consequence, a link to a force whose presence would soon descend upon them with relentless clarity. The first riders appeared on the horizon, silhouettes etched against the low storm clouds, dust curling in their wake like smoke from some distant fire. Their numbers swelled, 100, 200, riding with intent. Their war cries muffled by distance but resonant in the air. The cowboy felt the surge of tension, muscles coiled, senses heightened by years of survival. Yet he knew this would be no ordinary encounter. Honor demanded readiness, courage demanded vigilance, and trust, fragile though it was, demanded faith in the choices already made. The woman stepped beside him, voice low but firm. "They have come for me," she said. "My family, my father. The blood debt must be reckoned. You have acted rightly, but the desert will test all who stand in their path." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. There would be no negotiation without tension, no passage without peril. The storm above mirrored the one descending across the plains, a tempest of wind, dust, and intent. And in the heart of it, he stood ready, not just as a man of muscle and skill, but as a man of principle, willing to face whatever fury the desert and its inhabitants might unleash. The first riders closed the distance, thunder in their hooves, dust spiraling into a veil that made the horizon shimmer and shift. Their eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the barn with singular purpose. The cowboy could feel their presence like the tightening of a noose, yet he did not flinch. He knew the stakes, knew the risk, yet in that awareness he found clarity. The blood debt they carried demanded confrontation, but courage and honor would determine the outcome. The woman handed him a small satchel, her touch brief but deliberate. "Inside are what you may need," she said, "for the storm that is coming. Trust what I have prepared." He took it, nodding once, and felt the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in his chest. The first warrior rode close enough now that the dust stung their faces, the rhythm of hooves hammering against the earth in a cadence that set nerves taut. But the cowboy stood firm, arms steady, gaze locked on the horizon, feeling the pulse of impending conflict thrumming through the desert itself. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the approaching force in stark relief. Mounted warriors, their faces shadowed beneath hoods, weapons glinting, moving with coordination and purpose. The air grew charged, vibrating with anticipation and threat, the wind carrying a mixture of dust, ozone, and the faint scent of danger. The barn became an island of tension in the midst of the coming storm, a crucible where courage, loyalty, and survival would collide. The cowboy inhaled deeply, tasting the tension, the anticipation, the weight of choices made and the inevitability of those yet to be faced. Honor had been given freely, trust extended, and now the desert demanded payment in courage, in vigilance, and in the ability to stand unbroken when the storm struck. The first warriors reached the barn, slowing their pace as they assessed the barrier of timber and stone. The desert seemed to hold its breath with them. The sky darkened, and the air thickened with the promise of reckoning. Inside, the cowboy and the woman shared a glance, silent understanding passing between them, a pact of courage formed in the shadow of an approaching tempest. And in that suspended moment before the clash, before the fury of hooves and wind would descend, he understood the immutable truth of the frontier. Honor is its own shield, courage its own weapon, and survival demands the unity of both against the rising storm. Thunder rolled across the plains, a low, threatening growl that mingled with the pounding of hooves and the scream of the wind. The warriors closed in, a wall of shadow and intent, their eyes sharp, their weapons poised for judgment. Dust swirled around them, carving ghostly shapes against the storm-darkened horizon, while the barn stood defiant, a fragile bastion of wood and stone against the coming fury. The cowboy stepped forward, boots crunching on scattered gravel, his gaze unwavering, measuring, calculating. His heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation, the adrenaline sharpening every sense. The wind tore at his coat, snapping it like the desert itself sought to warn him, yet he remained grounded, anchored by choice and principle. Across the barn, the woman moved with silent precision, every gesture a study in alertness, every motion reinforcing the resolve that had brought her here. The first warrior leapt from his horse, landing lightly despite the uneven ground, eyes locked on the barn. The cowboy's hand hovered near his satchel, the tools within a testament to preparation, foresight, and necessity. Every instinct, honed by years of solitude and storms, guided him. Anticipate, react, endure. The tension crackled like lightning through the air, charged and unrelenting. The woman spoke, voice barely above the wind. They are skilled, swift, and they will not be deterred. Remember, courage alone is not enough. Wisdom must guide your actions. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words, their truth settling into the marrow of his bones. The warriors pressed closer, now circling the barn like predators aware of their quarry, testing its limits, testing resolve. The desert seemed to echo with every heartbeat, every strained breath, every footfall in the dust. And then the first clash, metal ringing against wood, a single warrior striking to test defenses, and the desert exploded into motion. Hoofs thundered as the cowboy drew his own measure, moving with precision, countering attacks with a rhythm born of necessity. Dust kicked into the air, swirling around them like smoke in a furnace, catching the morning light in shifting, golden spirals. Every movement demanded focus, every decision could tilt survival into peril. The barn creaked, groaned, as if alive to the unfolding confrontation, timber flexing under pressure, yet holding fast. The woman, her eyes alight with determination, joined him in the fray, not as a victim, but as an ally, a force measured and deliberate. Together they moved as one, anticipating, countering, striking with economy and purpose. The desert, indifferent to all but the truth of action, bore witness, the wind carrying dust and echoes of the unfolding battle across the plains. Lightning split the sky again, revealing the sheer number of approaching riders, warriors unyielding, relentless, a tide of challenge and consequence. Yet even as the storm surged around them, the cowboy's focus remained absolute, honed by principle, sharpened by honor. Every step, every motion, every breath was part of a larger rhythm, a dance of survival and courage beneath the wrath of the desert. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. In the heart of conflict, time dissolved into tension and motion. Warriors fell back, regrouped, tested boundaries, and pushed again. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the metallic scent of resolve. And through it all, the cowboy and the woman stood firm, their unity of purpose a beacon in the chaos, an unspoken declaration. Courage and honor are not given freely, but they carve paths through the storm, shaping outcomes invisible to those unprepared. Finally, as the storm began to abate, the warriors retreated slightly, assessing the cost of engagement. The desert exhaled, releasing tension into the cooling air, leaving behind a quiet charged with victory, survival, and reflection. Inside the barn, both stood, catching their breath, dust coating their hair and clothing. Yet the fire of purpose burned stronger than ever. The cowboy met the woman's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The blood debt had been tested, and though the storm was not yet over, the first trial had been met with courage, integrity, and precision. The desert, patient and unyielding, had observed, and in its quiet way, granted a measure of respect. Outside, the clouds began to break, letting shafts of sun illuminate the ridges and canyons in dramatic relief. The barn, battered but steadfast, seemed to glow with the resilience of its occupants. And in that moment, both understood that the rising storm had done more than threaten. They had been forged by it, tempered, ready for the reckonings still to come. Twilight fell across the desert like a curtain of molten red and bruised purple, stretching shadows long and ominous across the plains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape scarred and trembling, yet alive with tension. The barn, battered but unbroken, stood as a silent witness to trials endured, while the cowboy felt the weight of what was to come pressing against his chest. The dust had settled, but not the consequences. Word of his courage, his choice to protect the tribal woman, had traveled faster than the wind, carried on whispers and the shifting shadows of canyons. Now the desert's judgment was at hand. The father, a towering figure of authority and wrath, approached across the plains, flanked by the remnants of warriors, each step heavy with expectation, each movement a statement of impending justice. The cowboy stepped forward, boots scuffing the cracked earth, eyes scanning the horizon. The ridges and mesas glowed faintly in the dying light, long shadows stretching like fingers across the sand, as if the land itself were watching the inevitable confrontation. He felt the rhythm of the desert in his veins, the pulse of wind, the tremor of earth, the quiet knowledge that this moment, more than any before, would define honor and courage. The woman emerged from the barn, her movements deliberate, a calm presence amidst the tension. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, met his with a silent assurance. The reckoning was unavoidable, but they would face it as they had faced every trial. Together, steady, resolute. The father approached, mounted and imposing, the weight of generations carried in his gaze. His eyes, sharp and discerning, measured not only the actions that had brought them here but also the integrity that had guided them. The cowboy felt the pressure of history, of unspoken codes and ancient debts, settling on his shoulders. He did not flinch. He would meet the gaze, stand firm, and let honor speak where words could not. Wind stirred, lifting dust and loose straw, swirling around them like spirits observing the balance of courage and consequence. The father's voice cut through the quiet, deep and resonant, a sound shaped by authority and expectation. "You have acted with recklessness," he said, tone measured but edged with warning. "Yet in your recklessness, a measure of courage is revealed. Tell me, why?" The cowboy's voice, steady and low, carried across the desert expanse. "Because some things are worth more than fear. Because honor demands it. Because trust, once given, cannot be ignored when it is needed most." The father's gaze lingered, searching, probing, weighing every inflection, every nuance. The desert held its breath, the silence between their words as potent as the thunder of hooves that had passed, as powerful as the storm that had tested them all. Every moment was a judgment, every glance a measure of integrity. The woman stepped forward, placing herself slightly behind the cowboy, yet firmly within the sphere of the father's view. Her presence was both a challenge and an affirmation, a living testament to the stakes involved, to the unspoken bond forged through trial and survival. Lightning streaked across distant clouds, illuminating the faces of all present, casting a dramatic relief across the desert stage. The father shifted, a subtle nod acknowledging the courage displayed, the choices made, the integrity held firm in the crucible of danger. Yet the reckoning was not merely about bravery. It was about balance, about understanding, about the measure of a man in the eyes of those who observe not just his actions, but the spirit behind them. The cowboy remained silent, letting the weight of his resolve speak. The desert wind swept across the plains, rustling grass and lifting dust, a subtle chorus to the confrontation. And in that moment both men understood. This was a meeting of principle and authority, of courage tested and honor revealed, a reckoning not just of survival, but of moral truth. The father's voice softened, carrying a mixture of respect and caution. "You have done well," he said. "Yet the path ahead will demand more. The blood debt is acknowledged, but the desert's lessons are not easily learned. You have acted rightly, but now you must endure the consequences and prove the steadfastness of your heart." The cowboy nodded, feeling the final weight of the confrontation settle. The desert seemed to exhale, shadows lengthening, the wind whispering across canyons and ridges, carrying a message older than time. Honor and courage are not given freely, yet they endure, shaping destinies unseen, forging bonds invisible to those who measure only with gold or weapon. In that twilight, with dust still swirling and the sun bleeding toward the horizon, the reckoning had begun, yet it also offered understanding, a subtle, undeniable acknowledgement that integrity, courage, and steadfast honor could shape even the harshest landscapes, bending fate in ways unseen but deeply felt. The desert seemed suspended in a breathless pause, the horizon ablaze with the final embers of twilight. Shadows stretched long and sharp, folding into the crevices of the plains, hiding secrets, promises, and the quiet stirrings of judgment. The cowboy stood resolute, boots pressed into the dry earth, dust clinging to his coat, eyes fixed on the figure of the tribal father. Between them lay more than space. It was honor versus authority, courage versus expectation, trust tested by fire and blood. The father dismounted, the leather of his boots cracking softly against the parched ground. Each step carried measured authority, deliberate and commanding, yet tempered with observation, the kind only earned over decades of leadership. His gaze swept over the cowboy, appraising, questioning, weighing the man not only for the choices he had made, but for the character he had revealed in the crucible of storm and peril. "You have risked much," the father said, voice carrying across the still desert, low and measured. "Your horse, your safety, your very life, all offered freely. Why should this honor be trusted?" The cowboy's reply was simple, deliberate, carrying the weight of truth and clarity. "Because some debts are paid not in gold, nor in fear, but in courage and in the choice to act rightly. The measure of a man is in his actions when the world offers nothing in return." The desert wind lifted again, stirring loose dust into spiraling eddies around them. The tribal warriors lingered, silent sentinels of judgment, observing the interplay between two forces, one of inherited authority, the other of tested honor. The woman stood behind the cowboy, her presence a quiet anchor, reminding him of the stakes and the bonds forged in the quiet chaos of storm and survival. The father studied him, a storm of emotions flickering across his face. Suspicion, respect, the echo of a harsh code carried over generations. "You understand, then, the blood debt," he said. "It is not yours alone to bear. It rests on every action, every choice, every measure of courage. And yet, you have proven worthy in measure and in spirit." The words, though tempered, struck like lightning, illuminating the silent acknowledgement of a hard-won respect. The cowboy felt the weight shift slightly, a subtle easing in the tension that had coiled tight around his chest since dawn. Yet he remained vigilant, knowing that true reckoning is not over until balance is fully restored, until honor is acknowledged in both deed and consequence. The woman stepped forward, her voice low, carrying authority honed in the deserts and canyons of her homeland. "Father," she said, "the man who sheltered me, who acted with integrity, has faced danger without hesitation. His courage has been tested, and he has not faltered. The debt has been honored in part, but his heart, his choices, they speak more than words ever could." The father's gaze softened, yet remained intense, a tempered flame of authority and expectation. He extended a hand, a gesture simple yet monumental, bridging the gap of distrust, testing the strength of character, acknowledging the integrity forged in trials of wind, storm, and threat. The cowboy took the hand, firm, unwavering, the connection binding more than two men. It bound trust, courage, and the unspoken code of honor that stretched across the desert, beyond barns and storms, beyond fear and peril. In that grasp, the reckoning found its resolution, not in violence, but in recognition, in respect, in understanding that some debts are measured not in blood alone, but in steadfastness of heart. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the desert with sharp clarity, revealing ridges, canyons, and the dust still clinging to the warrior's boots. The desert exhaled, a quiet wind carrying away tension, leaving only acknowledgement and the simmering promise that the trials of courage, loyalty, and honor were ongoing, but now tempered by mutual recognition. The cowboy stepped back, releasing the father's hand, eyes meeting the woman's in silent understanding. The trials had been endured, the debts recognized, the balance restored. Yet the desert, ever watchful, seemed to whisper that vigilance must continue, that honor is a living thing, tested daily, preserved in choice, in action, and in courage unwavering. As night fully embraced the plains, the trio stood together in quiet reflection, the horizon a canvas of deep indigo, streaked with fading crimson. The reckoning was complete, yet the desert's lessons lingered, echoing in the wind, in the dust, in every silent heartbeat of the land. Courage had been proven, honor upheld, and trust forged in the crucible of storm and confrontation. And in that still moment, the cowboy understood fully. The measure of a man is revealed not only in facing danger, but in standing firm when the world demands more than fear, when the choice to do right comes without guarantee, and when the desert itself bears witness to the steadfastness of the heart. The first light of dawn seeped slowly across the plains, painting the desert in soft gold and pale lavender, as if the world itself exhaled after the trials of the night. The barn, weathered and scarred, seemed to glow in the morning light, its walls bearing witness to courage, honor, and the tests endured. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from distant clouds, mingled with dust and earth, a reminder that life in the desert is both fragile and persistent. The cowboy stepped outside, boots crunching against the dry soil, and let the morning wind sweep across his face. Every ridge and canyon shimmered in the soft light, the long shadows of night giving way to clarity. The tension that had gripped the plains began to dissolve, leaving a sense of calm earned through courage and integrity. He glanced back at the barn, at the woman who had entered his life like a whisper on the wind, and understood that the storm had not only tested strength, but also character. From the horizon, movement emerged, a solitary figure, striding across the golden sands with a deliberate, measured pace. The tribal father approached, accompanied by only a few remaining warriors, the rest having dispersed into the desert after witnessing the steadfast courage displayed. The morning light caught the edges of his clothing, the glint of his weapons, and the careful precision of his steps, transforming authority into quiet reverence. The cowboy met the father halfway, the distance between them charged not with tension but with recognition. The trials had been endured, debts acknowledged, courage tested, and now, the morning offered clarity, resolution, and a fragile peace. The desert itself seemed to watch, wind shifting through ridges and canyons as if whispering approval for integrity upheld and honor preserved. The father halted, taking measure of the cowboy's stance, his gaze unwavering. "You have acted with truth," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "The risks you took, the courage you displayed, and the honor you kept, it is rare in this world." The cowboy bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, his voice low but steady. "I acted as I must. The desert teaches harsh lessons, yet it also rewards those who face its trials with honesty and heart." For a moment silence stretched across the plains, the wind carrying the subtle hum of life, the rustle of distant grass, the call of a lone bird, the quiet hum of a desert that had observed every choice, every test, and every measure of courage. Then the father reached into a pouch at his side, producing a small object wrapped in leather, worn yet polished by time and care. He extended it toward the cowboy, fingers steady, eyes never leaving his face. "This is not gold nor silver," the father said, voice soft but laden with meaning. "It is far beyond wealth. It is a symbol of trust, of alliance, and of the honor you have preserved in the face of challenge. Accept it, for it carries with it more than value, it carries respect." The cowboy took the gift, unwrapping the leather to reveal a finely carved emblem, intricate and ancient, a testament to generations, to loyalty, and to the bonds forged in trials. He held it carefully, the weight of its significance pressing on him more than any coin could, more than any treasure unearthed from the earth. It was a symbol not only of gratitude, but of understanding, a recognition that courage and integrity resonate far beyond immediate danger. The woman stepped forward, her eyes softening as she watched the exchange. The bond between them, forged through storm, danger, and unyielding principle, now found expression in this moment of morning light. Trust had been earned, justice acknowledged, and the desert, ever watchful, had witnessed the quiet triumph of heart over fear. As the sun rose fully, spilling warmth across the plains, the cowboy and the woman stood together, the emblem resting between them. A token of alliance, a promise of peace, and a recognition of courage that would ripple beyond the horizon. The desert itself seemed to hum in approval, wind weaving through ridges and valleys, carrying the message that honor, once proven, leaves its mark not only on the land, but on those who dwell within it. The cowboy inhaled deeply, tasting the dawn, the dust, the remnants of storm, and the quiet promise of justice restored. Every ridge, every shadow, every light-soaked canyon told the story of trials endured and respect earned. And as he glanced toward the horizon, he understood fully that the desert, vast and unforgiving, rewards those who act rightly not with gold, but with trust, recognition, and the timeless acknowledgement of honor fulfilled. The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the plains and igniting the desert in golds and amber. Shadows shrank beneath the brilliance, revealing every ridge, canyon, and scar left by the storms of the past night. The barn stood quiet now, its walls bathed in morning light, weathered yet unbroken. A monument to courage, endurance, and honor tested and proven. The cowboy adjusted his coat, feeling the weight of the tribal emblem in his hands, a symbol of trust and recognition more profound than any coin or jewel. It was a quiet affirmation, a covenant forged through danger, sacrifice, and steadfast choice. The woman stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the clarity of dawn and the unspoken bond that had grown between them through shared trials. From the horizon, the remaining tribal warriors approached, not with threat, but with measured steps, their postures relaxed, weapons lowered. The desert carried the faint creak of saddles and the soft whisper of hooves in sand, the sound less like preparation for battle and more like acknowledgement, a gesture of respect for the courage displayed. Each step toward the cowboy and the barn felt deliberate, ritualistic, a silent passage from suspicion to recognition. The tribal father approached, slower now, each footfall echoing across the morning air. His eyes, sharp yet softened, met the cowboy's with unspoken understanding. "You have proven that honor is a force stronger than fear," he said, voice steady, resonating across the plains. "The courage you showed, the choices you made, they have earned the respect not just of my family, but of the desert itself." The cowboy nodded, heart steady, voice low but confident. "I acted only as the moment required. Courage is not choice alone, it is action sustained even when the outcome is uncertain." The father extended his hand, once more, not in challenge, but in affirmation. The gesture bridged worlds, cultures, and histories, binding them through principle rather than proximity, trust rather than obligation. The cowboy met the hand, firm, unflinching, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed and what was now set in motion. A new chapter of alliance, built on respect, honor, and integrity. The woman stepped forward, her eyes bright, the morning light catching her features in a soft glow. "The desert watches," she said, her voice calm yet compelling, "and it remembers. Courage and honor do not vanish with storm or shadow. They endure, shaping all who walk within its bounds." The warriors began to disperse, fading into the folds of canyons and ridges, leaving only the father, the woman, and the cowboy upon the sunlit plains. The desert seemed to exhale, a quiet wind stirring dust and loose straw, carrying the sense that balance had been restored. Justice, tempered by courage and honor, had been achieved not through force alone, but through steadfastness, principle, and moral clarity. The cowboy turned, watching the horizon, the ridges aglow in the brilliance of morning. Every scar left by storms, every mark of conflict, every trembling shadow was softened now by light and resolution. The desert, vast and unyielding, had witnessed the endurance of integrity and the triumph of principle over peril. The woman placed a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture both intimate and ceremonial, acknowledging not just survival, but recognition, trust, and the enduring bond forged through shared trials. Together, they looked out across the plains, knowing that the desert held new challenges ahead. Yet this moment, this dawn, was a testament to courage preserved, honor upheld, and justice realized. The emblem, held firmly in the cowboy's hand, gleamed in the sun, a tangible symbol of the intangible. Trust earned, deeds honored, and the enduring truth that true reward in this harsh world is measured not in gold, but in respect, loyalty, and the quiet acknowledgement of one's steadfast heart. And as the wind carried the last whisper of the departing warriors, the desert stretched endlessly before them, promising new horizons, new trials, and the quiet knowledge that integrity, once proven, shines brighter than the harshest storm or the deepest shadow. The desert lay quiet now, a canvas of gold and amber under the warming afternoon sun. The storms and shadows of night were gone, leaving only the soft hum of life returning to the plains, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of wind across dry grasses, the slow, deliberate steps of creatures emerging from hidden burrows. The cowboy walked among them, boots stirring dust lightly, each step measured, grounded in the calm that follows trials endured. The barn stood behind him, bathed in sunlight, its silhouette softened by the glow of the afternoon. Once a refuge against chaos, it now seemed a monument to perseverance, a symbol of courage tested and trust earned. The woman moved beside him, her presence steady, calm, a living testament to the bonds forged in the crucible of storm and threat. Together, they walked, not as strangers, but as allies shaped by shared trials. The tribal father approached, accompanied by a few remaining warriors, their expressions softened from suspicion to respect. The air between them was warm, filled with the subtle acknowledgement that past conflicts had given way to understanding. Trust had been established through action, honor recognized through endurance, and the desert itself seemed to nod in quiet approval. "You have shown the strength of your heart," the father said, voice even and tempered. "Not all who act bravely understand the weight of their choices. You do, and for that respect is due." The cowboy inclined his head, a slight, respectful gesture. "Respect is earned, not given, and I acted as I must. Courage, when guided by principle, is the only path to integrity." The woman's gaze shifted across the plains, taking in the ridges and canyons that had witnessed the trials of the past days. "The desert teaches many lessons," she said softly. "It tests patience, courage, and heart, but it also reveals bonds that endure beyond fear, beyond debt, beyond gold or material wealth." The father extended a hand, not in challenge, but in acknowledgement, bridging the distance between worlds. The cowboy took it firmly, and the touch was more than greeting. It was the binding of trust, the recognition of courage, and the affirmation of a bond that would carry forward into days yet unseen. Around them, the remaining warriors began to disperse into the hills, their movements calm and deliberate, a quiet reflection of respect earned. The air, warm and dry, carried the subtle scent of sage and dust, mingling with the soft chorus of life returning to the desert. The tension of prior nights and days had dissolved into a steady rhythm of harmony, a new cadence shaped by honor, courage, and the enduring lesson of integrity. The cowboy turned his gaze to the horizon, where the ridges met the sky, glowing faintly as the sun continued its arc. Every crevice, every shadow, every line of the desert whispered a reminder that small acts of courage ripple outward, touching lives in ways unseen, shaping bonds stronger than fear or threat, leaving an imprint not in stone, but in heart. The woman looked toward him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and quiet understanding. "Trust, once given, can grow into something enduring," she said, her voice almost a whisper against the wind. "You have proven that deeds of courage and honor create connections that outlast fear, that outlast the storms." And in that shared understanding, the cowboy felt a profound truth settle within him. A quiet certainty that the desert, harsh as it was, had rewarded integrity and courage with more than survival. It had offered connection, respect, and bonds that would endure beyond the trials, beyond the storms, beyond the reach of time. As the sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow across the plains, the cowboy, the woman, and the tribal father stood together, silhouettes against the golden light. Each movement, each glance, each small gesture spoke volumes of reconciliation, of acknowledgement, of a world where courage and honor had bridged divides and forged relationships that would last. The desert, silent and eternal, bore witness to this transformation. The trials of storms, hooves, and blood debts were past, leaving only the quiet promise that integrity, once tested and proven, resonates far beyond the individual, rippling outward into trust, connection, and enduring bonds across the vast expanse of land and spirit. The afternoon stretched across the plains, warm and steady, as if the desert itself had settled into a slow, forgiving rhythm. Dust rose lazily from the dry earth, drifting in gentle spirals before fading into the sunlight. The cowboy stood near the barn, shoulders squared, yet relaxed, eyes tracing the horizon where ridges met the sky in soft, muted lines. The chaos of storms, the echo of hooves, and the weight of past trials had receded, leaving clarity, reflection, and an unfamiliar sense of peace. The tribal father approached, gait unhurried, carrying the quiet dignity of one who had observed much and judged fairly. His presence was commanding yet tempered by the unspoken respect born of courage and principle. "You have honored more than my daughter," he said, voice steady and deep. "You have honored the code of this land, the unspoken truths that govern our lives. That alone ensures your place here, not as stranger, but as ally." The cowboy inclined his head slightly, the gesture both acknowledgement and humility. "Allies are formed through action," he replied, "through choice, and through standing firm when the world offers nothing in return but risk." The woman moved beside him, a gentle wind stirring her garments as she spoke, voice calm yet layered with emotion. "And so new bonds are formed," she said, "not of convenience, not of duty, but of respect, earned through trials, forged in storm and shadow, and solidified by courage." The father reached into his pouch once more, producing a small bundle of carved tokens, each etched with symbols of his tribe, intricate and precise, carrying stories older than the desert itself. He handed them to the cowboy, who accepted them with reverence, feeling the weight not just in his hands, but in the legacy of connection and trust they represented. The warriors, now dispersed across the plains, cast occasional glances back, their expressions softened, a quiet acknowledgement that the man who had risked all for honor and trust had earned their respect. The desert seemed to hum beneath their feet, the wind weaving through ridges and valleys, carrying the unspoken truth that courage, integrity, and honor leave impressions far beyond the individual. The cowboy's eyes met the woman's, and in that gaze was understanding, recognition, and a shared sense of purpose. They had faced storms, threats, and moral trials, yet emerged not only intact, but stronger, united in trust and shared values. Their bond was quiet but powerful, resilient as the land itself, forged in hardship yet tempered by compassion and principle. The tribal father watched for a moment longer, then nodded, turning his horse toward the horizon, signaling a return to the expanses of his land. "The desert teaches all who walk it," he said, voice carrying over the plains. "And those who listen, who act with heart and honor, are remembered." As he rode away, the sun reached its zenith, flooding the plains with golden light, illuminating ridges, canyons, and the barn now peaceful in the calm. The cowboy and the woman remained, side by side, absorbing the quiet rhythm of the desert, feeling the steady heartbeat of life returning to the plains after storm and conflict. The wind lifted once more, stirring dust and loose straw, carrying whispers of the trials past, the courage proven, and the bonds formed. The desert, eternal and impartial, bore witness to all, reminding them that honor and trust, once established, ripple outward, shaping lives, relationships, and futures in ways unseen but profoundly felt. The cowboy breathed deeply, inhaling the warmth, the dust, the scent of sage and earth, and the quiet acknowledgement of connection. Every trial, every moment of danger, every moral choice had led here. To respect earned, bonds formed, and the understanding that courage and integrity, when applied selflessly, create lasting impact. And in the soft, steady light of afternoon, with shadows retreating and the horizon stretching endlessly before them, he realized fully. The desert had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately rewarded them. Not with gold, nor with fleeting triumph, but with trust, connection, and the enduring certainty that honor endures when hearts act rightly. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, spilling amber and rose across the endless plains, stretching shadows long and serene over the desert ridges. The air was calm, a gentle warmth carrying the faint scent of sage, dust, and the remnants of storms long past. The cowboy stood atop a ridge, boots planted firmly in the earth, eyes tracing the line where sky met sand in an unbroken sweep of light and shadow. He felt the weight of the emblem still in his hand, a tangible reminder of courage honored and trust forged. Yet it was not the object itself that resonated. It was the principle it represented, the affirmation that the choices made in the quiet crucible of danger carry meaning far beyond the moment. The desert had tested him, demanded more than fear could offer, and rewarded him with a gift deeper than gold. Understanding, respect, and the quiet certainty that honor persists when hearts act rightly. Below the ridge, the barn stood peaceful, the woman nearby, their shared gaze reflecting the calm that follows trials endured. The tribal father had returned to his land. The warriors dispersed, leaving the plains open, vast, and silent, yet alive with memory, with echoes of courage, and with the invisible bonds that had been formed in the storms of yesterday. The cowboy inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the desert beneath him. The subtle shift of wind over ridges, the whisper of grass bending, the pulse of life that moves in silence yet carries all the truths the world demands. He understood that the measure of a man is not counted in coin, in land, or in fleeting triumph, but in steadfastness, in integrity, in the courage to act rightly when no one watches and when the consequences could break him. The woman stepped closer, her presence steady, the quiet acknowledgement in her gaze speaking volumes of trust, connection, and the shared understanding that some bonds, once formed, endure far longer than the storms that birthed them. The desert, eternal and impartial, seemed to embrace the moment, folding them into its vast expanse, a living witness to the choices made, the courage shown, and the honor preserved. As the last rays of the sun kissed the horizon, painting the plains in molten gold and deep crimson, the cowboy let his gaze drift across the land, across the ridges and canyons that had shaped the trials and victories of the past days. Every step taken, every risk faced, every moment of moral courage had led to this. A horizon beyond gold, beyond reward, where the truest wealth is measured in respect, trust, and unwavering principle. He felt a quiet peace settle within, the kind only earned through endurance and integrity, the kind that resonates long after storms have passed and dust has settled. The desert stretched endlessly before him, alive with possibility, silent testimony, and the enduring lesson that courage and honor carve paths deeper than any trail left by hooves, storms, or fleeting fortune. And as night began its slow approach, painting the sky with the first stars of evening, he understood fully. The greatest gift the desert offers is not gold, nor treasure, nor fleeting victory. It is the knowledge that a single act of selflessness, a single choice to uphold honor in the face of fear, echoes across time, shaping not just the present, but generations yet to come. In the end, the desert remains vast and unforgiving, yet it reflects the simple truth. Courage and honor carve paths through even the harshest landscapes. A single act of selflessness can echo across generations, teaching that the measure of a man lies not in gold or land, but in the fidelity of his heart and the courage to do right, even when no one watches.